I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
And this is When East
Meets West.
Pete, we're going to talk about risk-taking today. And the reason I'm excited about talking about risk-taking is, that the term risk or the word risk has a lot of negative connotations when, risk-taking isn't actually all bad. It's actually,
I've already started sweating.
You already started sweating. Thank God.
Because you're making me nervous. You're going to make me do things that I don't want to do today.
Oh, well, we're already on a helpful conversational track here then, because that actually speaks to how it gets negatively judged, right?
Sure
as something
does.
bad.
Yes.
So anyway, hello, welcome.
It's thrilled to be here to talk about risk taking. I used to be a risk taker-ish. I mean, I was never really that. You and I were probably never huge risk takers.
No. I mean,
no.
I mean, I think what you're highlighting is, maybe we could start by saying this way. You're referring to, I think, how the phrase risk taking is generally utilized, which is like, I would say, talking about like more impulsive behaviors. Right? Is that sort of what you're getting at?
No, I'm just thinking, no.
No? Oh, no. Oh,
No.
My apologies. Did not read your mind well there.
I mean, you almost always do, but for some reason you did it right there. No, I mean, I think because sometimes the risk taking, at least that I'm thinking about, also requires planning or can, actually be organized.
Sure. Okay. That's fair. Yeah.
Right. So like people take organized trips to like crazy places to go hiking or like.
You're thinking like more thrill oriented kind of.
Yeah. Well, that's risk.
Yeah,
I guess.
No, totally. Yeah.
Well, that's why I'm sweating.
Yeah. Okay.
I
fair.
feel like you're going to make me do something today that I could commit to something.
No, I will never make you do something. You're not willing to do. Well, okay. So I think, no, thank you for explaining that. So I think that's maybe the other side of like the common, like definitions most people have about risk taking is that they would say either number one, as I was just saying, impulsive behavior. So sort of react. So like an example might be like gambling, very literally, right? Gambling is risk taking, right? Very literally, and it's associated with impulsivity.
Mm-hmm.
What Pete's talking about is also really important, which would be risk taking that's associated with like an adrenaline rush, right? Like thrill seeking behaviors. Like, so, maybe going on, summiting a really like difficult, mountain or, big wave surfing or.
Oh, that's you.
Well, I'm not, no, see, I do not like surfing big waves, but I have friends that do. I do not like that.
But you surf.
Yeah, but
by the way, just surfing could be risky.
I mean, sure. Well,
come on.
Well, yeah. Well, but I think it's going to be a nice segue into like everything is can be risk taking, right?
That's a good one.
Yeah. So, but I want to start by just identifying that that's what we tend to view it as, right? Is like kind of more impulsive behaviors or these more sort of thrill seeking behaviors, which could, the thrill seeking behaviors may or may not be effective, right? Like they, you could, if there's, very famous, speaking of big wave surfers, Laird Hamilton is, he's very, very famous, married to Gabrielle Reese, the volleyball player.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And he is, I think, considered like the inventor of tow-in surfing, where like these like 50-foot waves, they tow them in on jet skis.
Oh my God.
So he, that's obviously a risk, right? But that's what he does.
And that's what I think about when I think about risk taking.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people do. And so that's going to depend on an individual about how much risk they're willing to tolerate, how much discomfort they're willing to tolerate, right? Though, risk taking in general, right, isn't necessarily always about something impulsive like gambling or like getting towed into a 50-foot wave, that we take risks every moment we make a choice. Can I ask, why do you think maybe I'm saying that? Like, can you read my mind in that moment?
Well, not really, except
really,
that,
no?
Well,
I bet you can.
I mean, I know that just walking on the street can be a risk, and just driving to the supermarket is a risk. I mean, there's inherently living is a risk.
Yes, you read my mind.
Well,
I knew it. Yeah, that's right.
We are the same person, but the reason that I guess I'm being a little catastrophic in the way that I'm approaching this. But one of the definition risk taking from APA is a pattern of unnecessarily engaging in activities or behaviors that are dangerous or highly subject to chance. So I think that's what I keep
Yeah.
thinking about.
Well, because I think, so that definition already, it's like built in, there's a negative judgment about what risk taking is. And I think
Right.
then the problem becomes is that, the human brain assumes that there's a way to be safe all the time.
Right.
And so
Ooh, that's a
to
good
your,
one.
yeah. And so what Pete, what you're saying is really important. It's not that it's so catastrophic. It's that I say, especially my folks I work with that struggle with anxiety, I say, being alive is risky,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
We're not immortal. Living beings are not immortal. Being alive is inherently risky.
Right.
And, to be really behavioral and also mindfulness based about it, we never know the outcome of what we're going to do.
Ever.
So it doesn't mean necessarily like, that risk implies physical danger, right? But like if you tell somebody that you have romantic feelings for them, you don't know what's going to happen.
That's right. And
Right?
that could
That's
be
a
risk.
risk. That's a risk.
Yeah.
But the brain is going to say, nope, don't risk things because why? It's uncomfortable. So I think that to me, that's really important because I want to take it away just from the like risk means doing something that's impulsive. Risk means,
Right.
like surfing a 50-foot wave. Those are certainly risk taking behaviors that may need to be talked about and addressed. But I think most people struggle with the quote unquote, like day-to-day risk taking, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's something that comes up and shows itself over and over again. I'll jump one of the Buddhist things that we think about and to all the listeners there, meditating is risky.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's been things written about that. And it's not, because again, the risk suggests that there's going to be like a meteor that's going to fall out of the sky and hit you when you're on your cushion. No, I mean, just sitting in silence and still with your thoughts, can be really, uncomfortable.
That's it. It's like, it's the risk. Maybe we can define it this way. Now it's a willingness to take the risk to be uncomfortable. That's what it is.
That's
right?
a good yep.
Yeah. Because, if we link this to values, as we talk a lot about on When East Meets West, is that living a values-based life requires risk-taking, right?
Yes,
like
yes.
trying things, doing things that are uncomfortable. So if we're saying, I don't want to be uncomfortable, I'm not willing to ever be uncomfortable. Number one, your world's going to be really small. But then it comes back to what I then say to patients, which is, okay, though, even in doing that, even if you're sitting alone in your room, not talking to anybody, being alive is still inherently risky. Like you're not eliminating risk from your life. What you are eliminating is the opportunity to feel meaning.
That's right.
Connection.
Beautiful.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and if you're sitting in that room, avoiding connection or without the risk of connecting and eating French fries, that plate of French fries may have more risk than actually communicating.
Sure. I mean, that's totally fair. That's totally fair.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, as we're talking about this, like, do you use the term risk taking with people that you're working with? Like, do you actually say, like, do you kind of define, acting in alignment with one's values as risk taking?
I don't know. I really went deep. If you saw my face on the YouTube channel, I really was like, I guess if I had certain athletes I work with or high performers, they tend to be a bit more riskier, like, because they're just sort of,
they're willing to do hard things.
They're willing to do things. Yeah. So, but I don't know if we call it risk. Like, I think it's just what they do. So that's why I don't know if I've actually used the word risk in session. I don't know.
Yeah. I like to use it because I like because I like to highlight and validate that it's hard, that it's uncomfortable, because I also can see patients a lot of times invalidating themselves or minimizing when they're taking these risks, which, by the way, I think it's just coming to my mind too, is that practicing vulnerability, right? That's risky. Like that's a risk. And so, people will say things to me like, oh yeah, I'm not, climbing like I'm climbing Mount Everest. It's not risky to just tell someone how I feel. And it's like, I'll say, okay, those are different types of risks though. Right. And to your brain and your body, it is a risk because you don't know what's going to happen, and you're risking being uncomfortable. You're willing to be uncomfortable.
And I like that you also already brought in about safety. So I think because as behaviors, we look at what are their safety behaviors. So say more about that. Like what would you say are common safety behaviors, and then how do you treat that, or what do you do with that?
Well, I mean, really, safety behaviors are just behaviors that we engage in when we are attempting to, I guess let's say it this way, attempting to eliminate risk,
Yeah.
right? We don't, and the risk is really, it's often, it often comes up with fear, right?
Yeah.
And anxiety. Though there are behaviors where we just are trying to avoid being uncomfortable, sometimes at all costs, right?
Right.
And so that's where I, tend to come back to this statement with people where I say, yes, and we have to radically accept that being alive is inherently risky. I'll actually say, and I do say this quite a bit with my folks that I work with that have OCD, because OCD is really focused on this. I'll say there's no such thing as 100% safety.
No such
right?
thing.
There's no such thing. We can be relatively safe, and we can't. Being alive is inherently risky, so we can't. There's nothing we can do to prevent something 100% from happening, right?
No, and that's where I think it's important to consider the context, the content, and the experience.
Yes.
Like thinking about in which context are people experiencing these ideas of risk? What's the content of it? Is there like an underlying theme? And then the experience of it. So like describing what it is non-judgmentally, and then also just behaviorally thinking about what someone's willing to do and not do.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you're, breaking it down to those three components, because I think that's important, because, Pete and I want to make clear here, we're not advocating for impulsivity, right? We're not advocating for reactivity. So, we're really advocating here for, I would say maybe we could call, people say like calculated risks, but maybe a better way to say it would be mindful risk taking.
Yeah, I like that.
Right?
Because you said gambling, which is good. And then I just think of like the stock market. Like anyone in finance, it's like
sure.
Yeah.
It's
there's like a lot of financial risk that we talk about.
That we take, sure. Well, and again, you could be mindfully doing those things, but
right.
you could also be doing them impulsively or reactively, right? Without thinking, and that's not going to be helpful, right?
Not helpful.
That doing things impulsively, or over thrill seeking, for example, that could put you in more danger, right? So it's sort of this difference between, mitigating or minimizing danger, and then the attempt to eliminate danger, which is not possible, right?
Yeah. And so Sharon Salzberg, which many of our listeners have probably heard of if you've ever done any kind of mindfulness stuff, she has written and indicated like in order to practice, we have to surrender, we have to take risk. And I think that's a lot of what we're asking, say, our clients to do in session is like surrendering. And that's ultimately when you're meditating or sitting on the cushion, that's what you do. You're just surrendering. You're just surrendering to that cushion.
I think it would be really helpful if you could clarify what surrender means, because I bet there are a lot of people listening that hear the word surrender and they imagine waving the white flag, like giving up, right? Which is obviously not what it is. It's not a giving up. Can you say a little bit more about what sort of like what surrender means from that that more mindful lens?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I you said the white flag, so you don't like that. And I'll say like the white flag could be a part of it, where you're just simply saying, I'm good. Like whatever the content is, whatever the context is, whatever my experience is, I'm just surrendering to it. Like I'm going to just watch what it is. I'm going to see how I feel. And I'm going to just sit. So I think to your point, the surrendering could actually be like the leaning in, which a lot of people might not like, but the surrendering might actually be leaning in.
Yeah. Yes. I like that.
I know you would, but there's gonna be, there's people that just don't love that leaning in thing now, because I feel like it's been a little overwashed.
Overwashed. Sure. So, well, it's maybe I can then weave in here that surrender is related to acceptance, right? It's maybe we might even say it's like I don't know. It's almost like a deeper acceptance, or like sort of it's a sibling of it or something, right? Because that's what I mean. Because that's what I said with the white flag is that. Because people often misinterpret acceptance as giving up too, and it's not, right? Like there's a more like maybe we could say it this way, like releasing into, right? There's like a I guess surrender maybe would incorporate some kind of trust as well,
Yeah, I could see
right?
that.
Maybe
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking of those. I'm laughing because it's like, those like kind of dorky team building exercise when you do a trust fall.
Yeah.
It's like, but that is surrender, right? That's like maybe like a very
Not so dorky,
yeah, well, or very dorky, but it's like that
but a
moment
good
of
practice.
letting go
Yes.
into that.
Because all of
so
us will have fear. And so I think in the East, we look at like, what's the role of fear? And is fear driving my behavior?
yes, that's
And I'm not gonna so gracefully fall back,
Mhm.
because if the fear will prevent that.
That's right. That's right. And so we're really talking about today saying that like if you're going to take mindful risks, it's like, are you mindfully willing to do the thing that elicits that fear, right? Again,
Yeah.
we're not saying that you all have to surf 50-foot waves, right? Like that's not we're
No.
not saying that you all have
Because
to.
I won't. That's why I started
Right,
sweating.
well,
I thought you were gonna
right.
make
See,
me.
me, and I will not either. That's not what we're talking about. It's about, are you willing to be uncomfortable and do things
Yeah.
that are aligned with what your values are, what you want to be about, while also knowing you don't know how it's going to turn out. You
Right.
don't know what's on the other side of that behavior,
Yeah.
like when you make a decision, it's a risk. We don't know the outcome, right?
Yes. Yes.
You know what's going to happen.
Can we go personal for a second? I mean,
I mean, maybe.
Ish.
We'll see. Yeah.
Well, I'm
I don't know.
wondering, like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, what's the riskiest thing I've done? Because I will share that. So if I go to this catastrophic definition, which I know you've been trying to help us realize that
Yeah.
life is just risk, but I do feel far more risk averse as I've aged, and I think that that's a thing. I think that there's sort of normal developmental risk aversion. Like, say, for example, like if I talk to my sister-in-law, or she's like, well, ever since I've had these girls, like I'm less comfortable doing things I used to do, because now that she's got 2 daughters, she sort of feels her mortality. But like what you've
Right.
started by saying is like, you were mortal before you had them.
Well, actually, it's very funny when I'm thinking about, as you're saying this, because I think that is true, that with
Yeah.
age, we become sometimes more risk averse to things that are about our physical safety, I think,
Yeah.
actually.
Yes.
Though I think, I don't know if it's paradoxically or just like on the flip side, I think many of us with age, though, become more skilled at
Yeah.
taking risks that are about emotional safety, that we're more willing to be vulnerable.
Oh,
with,
that's
'cause
true.
you know what I'm saying?
That's so
That,
strength-based. You're
right?
so good. Yes.
Well, but I think that's because that's what I was thinking for myself as you were saying that. I was thinking, yes, as I've gotten older, can become more scared of certain things that when I was
Yeah.
younger, I didn't think surfing being actually a good example of that. Though, but emotionally, I'm so much stronger at taking
Yes.
emotional risks, and I just continue to get stronger in that.
Yes. I love that. I love that distinction. And so there's that context,
Mhm.
so for us to think about, and for listeners to think about the context in which this risk will manifest. And so there is this like developmental risk aversion, maybe behaviorally or to our physical self. And so like, that's what I was thinking about is like, I used to like travel all over the world. I would go by
Mhm.
myself,
Mhm.
now it's like,
It
people.
sounds a lot scarier. It feels
Yeah.
and it feels scarier.
Yeah.
So again, in knowing you, I would say, though, you continue to also be stronger in taking more emotional risks, right? In your
Yes.
life,
Yes.
because that.
Although I
don't
still
know.
won't talk politics with my brother, but whatever. What does
Well,
that
we
say?
get, well, maybe contextually, maybe that's the more effective choice, right? Like we don't, like it was more effective choice. Well, I hope today listeners have maybe begin to think about risk taking a little bit more thoroughly here, right? Be hopefully able to leave this episode thinking about what they do, everything that they do as a risk. And I'd encourage everyone to see if you can take some mindful risks and trust that if those risks are aligned with your values, that regardless of what happens, you'll get stronger and be okay.
This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin.
And I'm Dr. Pete Economo. Be present, be brave. This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.